CFOs are constantly being asked to do more with less, certify numbers faster, and fall maybe on AI, while defending margins that no longer look defensible. Yet the real opportunity is not another efficiency program. It is to use the finance vantage point to change what the organisation is capable of seeing and doing. Today, this episode tells a story about two kinds of companies. Both look successful from the outside, both are celebrated in the business press, and both have executed bold transformations that turned crisis into opportunity. Yet only one of them has built a system that can do it again, an important factor in implementation as opposed to one-off execution. The question every CFO must answer is simple but uncomfortable. Which kind are we financing, and what do we actually want this company to become? Late last year, the Financial Times published its annual Reinvention Champions List, celebrating companies that fundamentally changed their business models to survive and to thrive. The names were impressive. One was RELX, once a traditional publisher of legal and scientific journals. It now operates as a data and analytics powerhouse, serving financial institutions and insurers with fraud detection and identity verification tools. Another was IKEA, which for decades stood as the archetype of an out-of-town big-box furniture warehouse, where you did everything yourself, has quietly become an omni-channel retailer with urban stores, home delivery and assembly services, and digital tools that lets you see furniture in your living room before you buy. From the perspective of a CFO, these stories are energizing because they prove that decisive action can pay off. And they show that boards and executive teams can make courageous breaks with the past and emerge stronger. Yet there is a pattern that often goes unremarked. In almost every story, what the headlines describe as a single bold jump. The major portfolio pivot, a sweeping restructuring, an act of courage in leaving the old business behind. But what is not always visible is whether the company has built a system capable of doing this over and over again. The question behind the celebration is whether these organisations can truly regenerate, or that they have simply delivered a single, brilliant, one-off. That distinction is not academic. It determines whether capital is building enduring strength or merely buying time before the next emergency. It's a matter of organisational intelligence, a capability that allows the organisation's collective ability to sense weak signals, reframe what they mean, and redirect resources before competitors do. This insight does not come from a single case, it comes from watching what happens to companies across multiple cycles. What happens before a transformation, during it, and crucially, years after the applause has faded. One pattern dominates those journeys. If you stop at restructuring, you reset the clock, but you do not rebuild the capacity to ring-in. Imagine a company facing pressure. Revenue growth is stalled. Margins are compressing, and a new competitor or technology is making parts of the business look increasingly vulnerable. The board approves the transformation program, cost initiatives are launched, portfolios are pruned, head count is right-sized, and non-core assets are divested. For a few quarters, the numbers look considerably better. Margins lift, cash conversion improves, the equity story tightens, analysts upgrade the stock, and the executive team is praised for its discipline. Yet beneath the improved numbers, something fragile is happening. Distinctive capabilities, the tacit knowledge, the connections between activities and functions, the organisational muscle that made the company genuinely different, start to leak away. The company becomes leaner but also more brittle. 18 months later, another shock arrives, a new entrant, a regulatory shift, a macroeconomic downturn. Suddenly, there is nowhere near to go because the transformation that looks so decisive has in fact optimised yesterday's logic. It has made the old business tidier without really designing a new one. The cycle repeats, another restructuring, more cuts, fewer options, until there is almost nothing distinctive left. On the surface, the organisation looks disciplined. Underneath, it is eroding, not regenerating. To understand this dynamic, it helps to revisit an old idea. In 1942, the economist Joseph Schumpeter described capitalism as a perennial gale of creative destruction, an innovation-driven force that continually sweeps away old structures and creates space for the new. In the real world of corporate finance, however, CFOs encounter not one, but two gales. The first is a gale of value destruction. It's that fragile event we referred to previously. A respectable cost reduction program, portfolio rationalisation, headcount reduction, better numbers, and a quieter, deeper erosion of the organisation's capacity to create new value. The second is the gale of creative disruption. On a positive note, the same willingness to cut, restructure and reallocate capital, but it is tied to a clearly designed future state of the business, grounded in a regime of tough decisions that still have to be made. Businesses are closed, markets are exited, assets are sold, yet every move is taken in the service of what the organisation is deliberately becoming. Capital and costs are reallocated to create the financial and organisational space for a new system of value creation to take root. RELX provides a useful example of this second gale. Over a period of years, it did not simply cut costs. It reframed itself from a publisher into a data-led analytics and information services enterprise, then restructured around that intent and revitalised its economics through subscription platforms and proprietary data assets. Today, its behaviour looks less like a one-off transformation and more like a regenerative system in which renewal is built into the way capital and capabilities are managed. IKEA, on the other hand, offers a strong example of advanced revitalisation with regenerative potential, but it's not there yet. Over a period of years, it has reframed itself from the urban big box format. But today's IKEA acts more like a business in late revitalisation, steadily building the ingredients of a regenerative system in which a desired ecosystem of products, services, and circular offerings can support ongoing experimentation, new revenue streams, and deeper customer relationships over time. Will they get to the next level? This is the fork in the road for any CFO. The critical question that will point them in the right direction is not, what do we need to cut to fix profitability, but rather, what do we want this company to become? It has a company that does not need rescuing because profitability and renewal are built into its system. To move from this question toward practice, a simple but rigorous math helps. The SMI cycle of organisational transformation and renewal distinguishes 4 stages: reframe, restructure, revitalise and regenerate. The SMI, by the way, is the forebear of our organisation today. It's called the Strategic Management Institute. Most organisations excel at restructuring. They know how to run with the cost programs, model scenarios, prioritise cuts, and manage stakeholder communications. What is often missing is the first stage, reframing, deploying the corporation's collective organisational intelligence to guide its members to think differently about the future. Unlike business unit leaders, the CFO sees across the various players in the corporate strategy domain. Accordingly, by design or otherwise, they are accountable for how the whole portfolio compounds over time. Reframing requires the entire leadership team to define the future dynamics of the firm before capital is moved. It's where the difficult questions are made exquisite and tested. Which markets will be served? And exactly how will we win in those markets? Which activities must be world-class, better, than ideally different to any likely rival? And which can be outsourced? What will customers actually buy from us in 5 years' time? And why will they choose us over the alternatives available to them? Although this exercise is critical to the commencement of a successful transformation, it is not a case of set and forget. It becomes a key component of strategic thinking on a regular basis. This is the essence of organisational intelligence in a context of continual renewal, specifically regeneration. If reframing is skipped and management moves straight to restructuring, the organisation may tidy the P&L and improve its margin profile. But as our own research has shown, it isn't sufficient to provide the foundations of tomorrow's corporation. It simply produces a better aligned version of yesterday. Over time, this choice creates 2 very different loops. The first is referred to as a vicious food. It's about weak or absent reframing that drives narrow cost-centric restructuring. This yields only temporary gains, few quarters of better numbers, before leading to capability loss, brittleness, and eventual collapse. The organisation stays busy and disciplined, but continues to erode. The second group is far more positive. It's referred to as a virtuous loop. Here, strong reframing guides purposeful restructuring. Capital and costs are reallocated toward a designed future. Revitalisation establishes new unit economics, and regeneration becomes a platform for continuous value creation. In this regenerative state, strategy is no longer episodic, it functions as a living system of renewal. To see regeneration more clearly, it helps to look beyond a single company. Nokia offers a powerful example of a business that has moved from near one-hit wonder status towards something much more sustainable. Founded in 1912 as a single entity, the company became recognised globally for its mobile phones, reaching a peak in 2007, holding a dominant 40 to 51% of the global handset market share at that time. The company exited the handset business in 2014 and reframed itself as a B2B technology and network infrastructure company from there on. It focused on building the backbone of the internet through 4G and 5G networks, fibre, and cloud-native infrastructure. It then restructured around that strategic change agenda of becoming a network infrastructure company by acquiring Alcatel-Lucent, doubling down on telecom infrastructure and intellectual property licensing, and pruning legacy consumer activities that no longer fit the future design. Over the decade that followed, this combination of reframing and restructuring supported a broad revitalization with growth in 5 key rollouts, private wireless networks, and cloud-native network software. Today, Nokia uses its integrated portfolio in advanced connectivity as a base for continuous moves into adjacencies such as industrial, private 5G, data center connectivity, and AI-enabled networks. In SMI Cycle terms, it has travelled from multiple painful restructurings through revitalization into an early regenerative state. In the state, its infrastructure and IP core fund the continuing pipeline of new growth and green shoot investments. Green shoot strategy refers to small, deliberate ventures and experiments that grow out of the core business and have the potential to become independent core businesses of the future. Alphabet provides another perspective on what a regenerative pattern looks like. Over time, it has repeatedly reframed its future being, from Google as a search engine to a broad digital ecosystem, and later to a holding group with multiple investments in AI, cloud, devices, and life sciences. It has continually restructured and revitalized around that evolving vision, ring-fencing Google from its other green shoot investments, reallocating cash from core advertising and search into new growth engines such as YouTube, Android, cloud services, and now AI platforms. All the while pruning experiments that do not scale. The core funds a rolling set of adjacencies and men shops. From a CFO perspective, this pattern is what Stage 4 looks like. The corporation is using its platform as a base for continual value creation in new markets, even entirely new industries. In the cases of both Nokia and Alphabet, the important signal is not a single transformation document filed in the board archive. It is a capital pattern that shows a recognizable rhythm of reframing, restructuring, revitalizing, and regenerating, all grounded in deep, critical, strategic thinking. Of course, not every story heads in this direction. There are also cases where strategy fractures and the organisation is pulled back into the gale of value destruction. Ford is one such example. Over recent years, it has been wrestling with a shift to electric vehicles. In 2019, it talked about reimagining mobility beyond the combustion car, smart roads, smart parking, and integrated transit. By 2021, the ambition narrowed to leading the EV revolution. In late 2024, the narrative moved again as Ford broadened its electrification strategy to lean more on hybrids, delay its next generation electric truck, and write off hundreds of millions of dollars in the EV manufacturing equipment. Then, in December 25, it announced the $19.5 billion EV write-down and guided to $5 to $5.5 billion in the EV losses for the year. From the vantage point of a CFO, this sequence looks like a gale of value destruction. Billions invested, capabilities partially built and then abandoned. Not because electrification is the wrong direction, but because that destination and the path to that destination kept changing. The financials reflect the volatility of the narrative. Arch rival to Ford, Tesla, demonstrated a related but distinct pattern. The company set a clear strategic change agenda from the outset, accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy, and for a time, executed extraordinarily well, building a profitable EV and energy business where many others had failed. From 2024-25, however, the narrative began to fracture. Elon Musk increasingly described Tesla as an AI and robotics company, emphasizing robotaxis and humanoid robots as the main sources of future revenue, even as the core vehicle business came under significant margin pressure. Given its success, it could be argued that the original execution phase was largely complete, and Tesla had reached a stage of maturity. Yet in strategic narrative terms, Musk was effectively starting over with a new chapter rather than extending the original one. Had Musk framed Tesla from the beginning as, for example, an autonomous human service company, and treated AI robotaxis and humanoid robots as the long-term pathway of what Tesla could eventually become, the current restructuring might have been positioned as a natural evolution in the multi-stage journey rather than a disruptive pivot in identity. Instead, the shift coincided with a sharp profit decline as aggressive price cuts eroded profitability, with operating margins falling from around 19% to mid-single digits, Tesla's lowest margin profile in several years. For CFOs, these stories sharpen the questions that need to be asked. How do you know which gale you are financing? What signals to you that you are building your renewal engine rather than underwriting another expensive cycle of cuts and write-offs? One way to answer is to change the questions asked in the boardroom and the executive committee. Consider these 6 suggestions. First, strategic clarity. Are we restructuring inside yesterday's logic, or have we explicitly reframed what we want this company to become? If the transformation case is mostly about fixing the cost base and only vaguely describes a future business, that is a red flag. Second, strategy system. Most corporate strategy content offers strong situational insight and a desired future, but time-bound planning horizons restrict dynamic thinking and neither reduce uncertainty nor anticipate roadblocks. This can be improved by using external environmental scenarios, rather than the internal guesses to define the evolving future context in which the corporation must compete. Then applying backcasting from that future to identify and prepare for likely hurdles along the way. Third, capital patterns. Does our allocation of capital over the last 5 years look like a signals of emergencies, or does it reflect a design for renewal? Is there reserve capacity for follow-on disruption and for green shoots, small deliberate business experiments that may grow to future calls? Or does everything implicitly assume that we stabilise after this? Fourth, governments. Is transformation handled as a time-bound project, or has the board taken responsibility for continual strategy renewal, regularly testing assumptions, watching the environment and commissioning fresh disruptions? Fifth, information. Do our reporting and analytics assume that the company's shape is stable, or do they give clear and integrated line of sight to emerging businesses, alliances, and value systems? If new ventures sit in a fog, the organisation is structurally blind. Sixth, talents and incentives. Are leaders rewarded only for delivering the current restructuring, or also for seeding and scanning the next wave? If all performance measures are backward-looking, the system is optimised for efficiency, not for tenacious resolve. Asked consistently over time, these questions determine which initiatives get funded, which are challenged, and which are stopped early. They recast the CFO from a guardian of the status quo to the primary architect for the organisation's capacity to evolve and grow. So what does the regenerative stage, that 4th step in the SMI cycle, look like when translated into governance and one-way morning practice? First, there is a living integrated value system. Strategy is no longer a PowerPoint document. It is a system that links dynamic markets, differentiating value-creating work, core competencies and other strategic assets to exquisite shareholder and stakeholder outcomes. Markets, work, and capabilities are all treated as moving parts, so finance plays a central role in keeping the system alive, continuously testing assumptions, updating scenarios, and challenging whether the work that once differentiated the firm still does, and whether underlying competences remain distinctive as conditions change. In practical terms, strategy reporting begins to show in close to real time how markets are shifting, where gaps are opening or closing, and which strategic assets and competences need refreshing. So strategy itself operates as a living, responsive system rather than a static plan. Second, there is a visible portfolio of disruptions. Instead of a single heroic transformation project, the organisation maintains a set of options at different scales and time horizons. The core business funds the present, while a defined portion of discretionary capital is consciously reserved for deliberate disruption, green shoots, adjacencies, and structured experiments. Leaders can see which options are being tested, which are being scaled, and which are being retired. Capital allocation explicitly separates stabilisation from design to disruption, and the CFO can talk credibly about managing a portfolio of futures rather than a portfolio of products orchestrated along a single path. Some live platform companies offer a useful analogy here. They continually seed and prune investments around their core business, and those moves are visible in both capital allocation and segment reporting. But green shoots can't always work. Examples are Google Glass, Meta's virtual reality platform, and Apple's Newton, to go back a little while. Although regeneration does, these apparent failed green shoots are useful illustrations of a regenerative pattern in another but similar format. For example, Google is about to announce the relaunch of its newly defined version of its retired glasses in the form of AI-enabled and augmented glasses. Meta is proposing something similar for its headset range, and the Apple Newton handheld device provided input to other highly successful handheld mobile products. You guessed it, the iPhone in particular. All examples of regeneration at scale. Third, there is a formal program of continual strategy renewal, the platform upon which organisational transformation and renewal can be maintained. For the CFO, this means that strategy, risk and opportunity are reviewed with the same discipline as liquidity, covenant compliance or credit risk. For the board, the relief is palpable. When treated as a system, strategy processes are auditable and trackable, and ownership is clear. Directors understand that they are not responsible for predicting the future, but they are responsible for governing how the organisation learns about the future and how to renew its strategy system. When these three features come together, a living integrated value system is formed. There is a portfolio of green shoots born out of a program of continual strategy renewal. From there, the organisation is able to occupy the fourth quadrant, that of the SMI Cycle, a state of continual value creation through organisational regeneration, rather than an oscillation between comfort and crisis. Bringing the story back to the CFO Central, restructuring is not optional. Every organisation will at times need to reallocate capital, prune portfolios and make hard calls about what to keep and what to let go. Yet restructuring alone is never enough. If finance sponsors only blood restructuring and the conversation begins and ends with cost, the gale of value destruction is amplified. The company becomes leaner but also more fragile, more dependent on the next round of cuts, and thus able to create new value. If instead finance insists on clarity about what the company is becoming, if the CFO slows the conversation down long enough to ask reframing questions before capital moves and keeps asking them throughout, then the same energy can be converted into creative disruption and over time into regeneration. That starts makes the CFO a necessary productive friction in the system. The one role with the authority and visibility across the business and the government's responsibility to ask, what are we actually building here? What do we want this organisation to become? 3 practical moves follow from that role. Before approving the next major transformation or restructure, take your most recent transformation and map it against the SMI cycle. Where did genuine reframing happen? How do you see revitalisation? And is there any sign of regeneration, or did you stop for the tidier P&L? In your next capital cycle, explicitly propose a portfolio of disruptions by ring-fencing a proportion of capital for deliberate desired experiments. Those green shoots that might grow into future growth platforms rather than allowing disruption to be forced upon you by events. And finally, ask your strategy team directly, what are we becoming? If the answer is essentially a slightly better version of today, you know there is still reframing to do. Strategy is not a document presented to the board once a year, it is a living system. When that system is designed for regeneration, then reframing, restructuring, revitalization and renewal become a rhythm rather than a one-off event. Value creation becomes continual but episodic. The companies that master this pattern do more than survive the next disruption. Their filings their own. This makes them reinvention champions rather than masters and one-hit wonders. This has been the CFO Strategy Brief. Until next time, keep asking, which gale are we financing and what do we want this company to become?